Hi everyone, my name is Joshua Schmidt and I'm an MLTI ambassador here at the Maine Department of Education. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be covering topics to help teachers create more authentic engagement in their classrooms. These videos will be related to Erik Wade's series on student engagement from last year, and that will be linked in the description below. There will also be a link for those looking for contact hours as they watch these videos. Our first topic is going to be extending Erik's definition of gamification and game-based learning while looking at ways for teachers to use these strategies to create more authentic engagement in their classrooms. If you're looking for support while using these strategies, a thinking partner on the best ways to implement them, or some support for your school or staff, please reach out to me or another member of the MLTI Ambassador team. Throughout today's presentation on game-based learning and gamification, I want to cover four major concepts, which we're going to call our quests for the day. We're going to start with an overview of what gamification and game-based learning are, and move into finding the learning and explaining why teachers would use each of these strategies in their classroom. We're going to look at some examples of each of the strategies in action. And finally, we're going to talk about the competition problem and something that you can do in your classroom to try to avoid that problem when implementing these strategies. At the top is a bit.ly link that will go right to this slide deck in case you wanted to see any of these resources yourself, including any of the videos that I've embedded into this, but I'm not going to go through during this actual video today. On the left is my Hi Hello card, which you can scan with a QR code just simply on your phone as a way to contact me if you had any questions. And on the right side is my maine.gov email, as well as my phone number if you had any questions or were looking for a thinking partner on implementing any of these or other strategies into your classroom. So just to make sure that you've seen it, this is the video that Erik created last year on gamification and game-based learning. It is a fantastic resource that goes through the definitions of each of these strategies in detail, and I would recommend, if you haven't watched that, to watch that video first before we're going to cover what we're going to today. As a really short review for those who have watched the video before, gamification is using game components outside of a game to increase learner engagement, while game-based learning is using, creating, or modifying a game to critically understand a concept or strategy. The major difference between these things is gamification is making your classroom like a game, and game-based learning is playing a game to learn something inside of your classroom. These strategies are frequently used together and interwoven between each other, but it is not a requirement to use both in order to use either one. For most of today's video, we're going to cover them separately, but remember that there are many opportunities to weave these concepts together to create even more authentic engagement in your classrooms. But before we get into the examples, I think it's really important to stop and discuss the why. Why do I like using game-based learning and gamification, and why do other teachers use this in their classroom? And the short answer is that research points out that when students have increased engagement, they have increased retention and recall. And it is possible to increase your learner engagement without sacrificing your content quality. In fact, when I use game-based learning and gamification in my classroom, I'm actually able to increase the rigor of the activities that I'm doing because my students are giving me more effort and engagement with those activities. So that's the reason why I'm so passionate about these strategies, is that we can use them in our classroom and increase the challenge and rigor while teaching all of those valuable skills. So we're going to find the learning in each of them, really focus on how we can use them to teach our content and curriculum well. We're going to start with gamification. And because gamification is making your classroom like a game, but not usually playing a game in that strategy, the content can stay really similar to what you're doing. In fact, in some cases, it can stay exactly the same as it is now. You're just creating incentives for the behavior you want to see more of in your classroom. I would recommend, though, that you shouldn't be looking to add grades to this incentive. You can keep your grading structure exactly the way that it is without gamification. And you can work to incentivize other strategies into your classroom that you want to see more of. For example, growth mindset works fantastically within gamification because you can use badges and rewards and leaderboards to show a student's progress on a skill over time. Gamification is also a great opportunity to teach some healthy competition within your classroom, but we do have to be careful about the competition problem, which we will talk a lot more about at the end of the video. In Erik's video, he listed these 5 concepts as the main gamification pieces. And with all of these 5 concepts, what I would recommend is thinking about what do I want to incentivize and reward in my class? And then how could I use these to help incentivize those skills? If I wanted to focus on growth mindset, maybe I make a progression chart that's very visual that showcases a student's progression on a certain skill set. Or if I want to reward students who are really good at working cooperatively in groups, maybe I make badges and systems in place for them to get physical rewards when they're working well with their peers. The 3 major things that I try to remember when I'm using gamification is that the learning and the playing can be separated within gamification really naturally. But the goal is always to reward and incentivize authentic engagement. I always think of a situation where if I'm trying to teach equations to my students, we could go outside and play dodgeball and they would be really engaged with that activity. But that probably doesn't help me teach equations down the road. I need to figure out ways to gamify my classroom in a way that incentivizes that authentic engagement for the activity that we're working on. Now, gamification exists outside of education as well, and the major difference is within that authentic engagement. So, for example, one of the most common gamification things that we see are like likes on Facebook or points on internet websites like Reddit or Instagram. But there's also like retweets and likes on Twitter, as well as Snapchat streaks. Even food sites like McDonald's or Starbucks have their gamified system. And my Apple Watch even tries to gamify my exercise throughout the day. And all of this can be extremely overwhelming if we don't put it in the proper context. And while looking at gamification outside the classroom can be overwhelming when viewed all at once, it gives us a great framework to think about the differences with gamification inside the classroom versus outside of it. And that huge difference comes down to what type of engagement you're trying to reward. Frequently, outside of a classroom, any type of engagement is rewarded with retweets or likes or points or whatever type of system there is. However, in a classroom, we have control over rewarding the right types of engagement and the right types of behaviors from our students. So rather than rewarding any type of engagement, it's important to remember that you're trying to reward and incentivize that authentic engagement in your classroom. Whatever things you want your students to be doing more of or putting more effort into is the thing you should create your rewards and incentives around. So with gamification, one of the nice pieces is that you can make these rewards and incentives as small or as large as you want, and they frequently can intersect with each other. So on the left is the STAR system from Matific, where this replaces a level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 proficiency scale, where these badges can either be electronic or physical badges that you can provide for students when they reach those certain milestones. The one at the top are different types of badges. Once again, could be electronic or physical badges, and you can make them for different skills within your classroom. You could have them be the cooperative badge or the hardworking badge or the creative badge. Whatever thing you're trying to reward and incentivize could match up with these systems. On the right is actually the store that I did in my classroom, which students could earn classroom currency by being a good classmate or asking good questions or being willing to work through problems with each other, or even just challenge themselves into an activity that was outside of their comfort zone a little bit. And they could use that currency to then buy things off the store. And then the more they had, the more exciting that reward could be. All of these could be merged together to do what John Deli from Harrisburg, South Dakota does, which is he has his students create actual characters that are physical manipulatives in his classroom, and his activities give them experience points. And at a certain number of experience points, they can level up to get rewards and different incentives within the structure. But once again, everything that Mr. Deli does is focusing on what he's trying to reward and incentivize with his learners. Now, in comparison to game-based learning, one of the big differences is that the incentive structure of game-based learning is almost always the game itself. And one of the misconceptions is that the game and the learning are separate from each other, that the learning might work its way around the game, but it never intersects in a natural way. And so what I would like to talk about with some of these examples is to look at how the learning and the game can be interwoven in an authentic way. So the most common example that I see is where the learning is built into the structure of the game itself. And this is one of my absolute favorites. Manga High is a website that has math-based games. And the thing I love about this example is that Manga High has made the game so that the math and the game are interwoven. It's not like one of the flash games you might see your students play where it says they're learning a skill, but really all they're doing is clicking the mouse button 100 times. The actual math helps them complete the game more efficiently and more effectively. My job as an educator is not to create or modify the game. It's to find the specific points of this game that match to my content or the specific skill that I'm trying to teach. This is Minecraft EDU, and on the right side is a video that Erik made last year that does a great job outlining the strengths of Minecraft EDU and what it looks like from the teacher and student side. I would highly recommend watching the video if you haven't already. But basically in Minecraft EDU is they have pre-built lessons that you can create. And what makes this unique is many of your students are very familiar with Minecraft structure and how the game is played. And now taking your curriculum and inserting it into this structure is adding that layer of incentive for your students. But once again, your responsibility as a teacher is to decide where this fits and how you will incentivize and reward that structure, not creating the game at all. Now, by comparison, there is Prodigy Game is an example where there is a game that the students play, and then on the back end of the game is very traditional appearing content. My job as an educator is then to insert the right types of content for the students while they play the game. So every turn of the game, they answer one question. And I can choose that content from a pre-built bank inside of Prodigy Game. I don't have to make the questions. I don't even have to assess the questions. All that's done naturally. And once again, the incentive for the students is to be able to play that game. And my responsibility is to find where that content ends up aligning naturally with what I'm trying to teach. Now, while those two examples are the most common uses of game-based learning, there is one other situation that happens, although less frequently than the others. And that's where you have an existing game outside of your classroom that ends up intersecting really naturally with the content that you're trying to teach. For example, when I was working on probability, I found that two of my favorite games, Uno and Phase 10, worked really nicely for teaching the skills that I wanted to teach to my kids in the classroom. In that situation, we were able to play those games as part of the probability content, and then the assessment could be creating situations inside of the game structure and asking students the probability of if they drew a red card next, or what are the odds of them winning on the next turn. Now that we've talked about some examples for using gamification and game-based learning in the classroom, I want to talk about one of the problems that people bring up to me a lot when they've tried these strategies in their classroom, which is what I'm going to call the competition problem. And the competition problem basically means that when your students feel like they're always in competition with each other, it can feel like the learning itself becomes a competition, that there's always a highest score and a winner and a loser in all of these activities. And these teachers have felt like they didn't want to do as much game-based learning or gamification because they didn't want to do as much head-to-head competition. So I think it's important for us to talk about that there are multiple competition types that might work in different situations. Now, the most common one is student versus student, the idea that there is a high score, there is a competition, the students are competing with each other, and there are ways to make this level of competition really healthy and productive. However, if your students are getting worn out from student versus student, there is another skill called student versus score, which in this case, we are all working cooperatively to try to achieve a certain score. So this could be playing a game like Prodigy Game and trying to get a total number of correct questions by the end of the class period or by the end of the week. But it also could be playing a game together as a class and trying to get to the lowest time possible so that everyone in the room is competing together to try to beat a high score. But it also could be playing a game like Flower Power, where you get your individual high score, and then we group it together as a class to try to beat a set total, maybe the class from last year type of thing. Now, another example that fits really nicely with growth mindset is student versus self, that maybe when you're progressing on your quests for the week, maybe one of the activities is to track your progress on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and to try to beat your previous high score and use that as a tracking mechanism. You also could use student versus self as a great way to think about your own learning. Maybe there is a journal process that talks about the strategy that you used as you were improving and why that strategy was better, or maybe what they would teach to another learner and what they would recommend for that strategy. So today we've talked about four big things. We've reviewed the definitions of game-based learning and gamification. We found the learning inside of these different strategies and why teachers would use them. We've looked at some examples of these strategies in action. And then we also talked about what to do about the competition problem and how we can use multiple types of competition to create a healthy growth mindset with our learners. Once again, that hi hello card on the left is access to me, as well as my email and my phone number here at the main DOE. And the bit.ly link at the top will give you the this slide deck for any of the resources or videos that you saw today. And once again, I just want to recommend, if you have any questions or are looking for a thinking partner to try to implement any of these strategies, please reach out to myself or any other member of the MLTI Ambassador team, and we would love to help you in any way we can. Thanks, everybody.